Okay, so it's 3 o'clock. I will call the work session together on SB 412. Guess I'm done with that now. Can we all just have Henry start off with an explanation, or do others of you have? Okay, Henry, why don't you come up and have at it? Thank you. Should say Mr. Lippman. My apologies. Director Lippman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Henry Lippman, the Medicaid Director. I think I would like to start sort of at the very top, that included in the budget in every year is a lump sum amount to cover nursing facility costs. And historically, there's also you may have heard in other contexts, a factor that the department, the total budget amount does not necessarily equate to a 5% rate increase. And that's what I want to explain in my discussion here with you. At a global level, the amount that is available to fund services, right, patient days in the nursing facility, is a function of the total budget that we're allowed to work with. In this case, whatever it was originally plus the 5%, and the number of days that we expect to pay for. You may recall, I believe it was an HB1 that originally 3,900 was the number of days, and bed days that we'd be paying for over the course, every day for the course of a year is effectively what that amounts to. As you're also aware, because many of you work on county level things, that county nursing homes and other nursing homes have had a decrease in the number of days due to COVID and related things, staffing shortages and what have you. And so, well, I think this was the first time that I'm aware of that in the budget documents that a prescribed number of days was included in there. And so in setting the rates, which on a facility level vary based on the acuity, meaning the intensity of service that they have, and their costs. So if you kind of think about it in a personal level, you know, we're dealing with inflation now, right? Just on a personal level, inflation's 8.5%. If you get an increase, say, in Medicare of 6%, you know, that you're actually going to lose spending power. In much the same way, the nursing facilities, if their expenses go up, and they could potentially, even though they're getting more money, result in a lower rate because their expenses are increasing higher than the amount of money that we're putting in. But so what ended up happening very early on, I think you have a question, I can see. Yeah.
Well, sort of. When you said the rate would go down, the relative rate would, but the absolute rate was only impacted by the bed days, not by the inflation rate, correct?
Correct. I was just using inflation as sort of a comparison, something that people could maybe connect in their personal life. That,
okay.
You know, if inflation goes up more than your salary, then you end up losing spending power. Similarly,
and you said something else. For the first time, we put in a bed day in the budget. So that was probably a mistake on our part.
I think I'll look to Kevin if he has a different perspective on that. But I think that we also got an opinion that we could deviate from that based on what we were observing. And so we reset the rates based on a more current experience in, I believe, October, which led the rate increase when we just used the 3,900 was around 1.6%. And then when we were able to reset it based on more current, but still, I think, lagging behind what was happening number, we were able to get the rate up to 3.6%. And then we did another rate setting in January, which we would ordinarily do. And the rate got up to 5%. actually a little bit up above 5%. I think Senator Rosenwald and what who was the other senator? No, it was a Republican. Senator Guida, both were on top of us real quickly in terms of, they were hearing from constituents. This wasn't what was intended in the budget. And so, I think they try to fashion something where, there would be potentially, if needed, so that the full year of 22 and the full year of 23 would support, the 5% increase, which I think was the intent of the legislators in terms of putting 5% more in. I think what wasn't, I think, transparent is that there's a whole state plan methodology that depends on the individual facilities' cost and their acuity as well. But so the way nursing facilities are ultimately reimbursed is that the legislation in this year and other years says anything that's left in the account at the end of the year gets paid back out pro rata based on patient days. So it looks like, we're at 5% now, but I think in the Senate, the perspective was we want the 5% to at least be in effect for the entire year. We've also identified that, there's some risk in 23 if, the COVID situation and the labor situation turns around, that we could also see, patient activity go up again, number of patient days, that we could find ourselves short in 23. So I think the idea in the legislation was to have the 5 million as a contingency, if need be, to make sure that the 5% was delivered. And if it wasn't needed, then it would lapse back into the general fund. And if you can correct me if I've got that wrong, please, Kevin.
I guess the only thing I would comment on is whether you think that, say you get the $5 million appropriation authorized by this bill, whether you think that any unspent amount would go back into the general fund, or whether you think the footnote on 2152 would apply that says any unspent amount goes back to the nursing homes at the end of the year. I'm not really clear on that myself.
I guess the way I've interpreted it is that we would only tap into that 5 million to the extent that it was needed to deliver the 5%, and otherwise it would lapse, unlike the 504 account, would lapse back to the general fund. I think that was the senator's intent in introducing that.
And one other question, and that's to apply not just through this fiscal year, but also through FY23, this $5 million.
The biennium. Yep.
Okay. So question, you said in January we calculated and you hit 5%. So had you used those same parameters back in July of last year, you would have hit the 5% right then, correct?
Right. If you remember, though, it's like we've gone through waves of this seems to be over, and then it's not, or we're going to recover in terms of healthcare activity, and then it hasn't. And I think what we're seeing now is this seems to be, the workforce shortage is maybe a larger factor than even any particular public health issue, if you will.
So how do you read this bill, that there should be immediate, if this passes, that there should be immediate payment to make up for the last, whatever's been since July, and then applying the 5% going forward, or that we apply the 5% going forward and see if we run out of money by the end of next year?
So I see it as we apply. I think you have to look at this on a annual basis because of the 504 account provision where any leftover amount gets passed back. So the way I look at it is, do we achieve 5% for the full 22? If we have, then we wouldn't use any of it. And if it went into 23 and we were short of being able to sustain that rate, then we would.
Okay, but we're not going to, we wouldn't hit the full 5% for the full year if we're only at 5% now and we don't go up, or am I misunderstanding?
Yeah, I think that if I'm correct in terms of how the 504 account flows, is that at the end of each year, we, this is Christy Roy, who actually does the work behind the scenes here.
Due to the fact that utilization is so low, due to the fact that the utilization has decreased so much, the remainder in that 504 account, we're assuming for the remainder of this year could be enough to sustain the 5% for the full year. So if we calculated the average rate for all the nursing facilities at the utilization that they're actually at, rather than what the forecasted utilization was back when we calculated the rates at the beginning of the fiscal year, it would be 5%. Is that clear?
It is if you're expecting that there'll be a greater payout in the final few months here so that the average works out. Is that kind of what you're trying to say?
Yes, so at the close of the fiscal year, whatever remains in that 504 account will be paid out. We could expect that figure for the last 4 months. We would expect that figure could be enough to cover 5% as an average for all of the nursing facilities.
Okay.
Not facility specific 5%, but on average
And that doesn't even require any funds from this bill were to become law
for this year.
for this year. And then
5% for the year or just for the last 2 months?
average over the year.
5% on average for the full year. We're currently at 5% now, or just over 5%, an increase of where we were and as of June now. But we're talking about for the full year, but that's only for this year, not for next year. We can't project that yet.
Okay. Just because you're not aware of what the potential average bed counts and that sort of thing will be.
Correct.
And cost reports, and acuity. So there's multiple figures in there.
But I'm guessing that you have some feeling for how that varies over time.
We generally do, but there's definitely been challenges with COVID. I mean, where we were always around the 4,100 when that original 3,900 was put in, it was a relief because the facility saw it as a relief. However, when we were trending at 3,600, it became a hindrance. So we had always had the flexibility to use actual figures as they were trending, and that challenged us.
So it sounds like you think perhaps bed counts will go up in the next year.
I think the industry folks here probably have a better feel for us, but that is, I think, a possibility. None of us have been predicting utilization very well in this environment. But the way I kind of look at it is we're trying to meet the legislative intent of what was passed, which is to provide an average increase of 5%. I think we will be able to do it based on what we're seeing so far this year. 23 is a question mark. I think when the legislation was introduced by the senator to begin with, it was less certain that we'd hit 5% because we were only at 1.66 and then 3 point something, and so getting another look at it. I think maybe the larger picture that, and I wasn't here for the earlier meeting and I apologize I wasn't able to make it, but I think the nursing facility sector with wage costs and everything's under a lot of pressure. I think what we're addressing here is whether the 5% can be achieved or not. I think there may be other arguments that it needs to be more for other reasons, but we just want to be testified to the bill specifically, sort of stay in the four corners.
Other questions? Representative Wallner?
So I just want to be clear. I just want to, for myself, be clear. So for this year, you would not need to use, and are not anticipating that you have to use any of the 5 million that's in this
Correct.
bill. Okay. So you have enough to do the 5% and not use this, but it's in the next fiscal year that you anticipate that you'll need the 5 million in order to continue the 5%.
Right. And the
increase.
reason is because going from 4,100 to 3,900 to now about 3,600, I think we're at somewhere in that neighborhood. That gives us confidence if that were to spring back, then that's where we wouldn't necessarily have enough money to cover that 5%. And that's most likely now to play out in 23 based on how far we're in the year. Excuse me, I think maybe I misspoke, but
No, yeah, it originally the bed days
41.
we had started and we had been using 4,100, and then there was a bed day factor put into one of the House bills that was 3,900, and that was what caused the challenge. And where we were actually at that time was around 3,600, I believe. And then when we readjusted in October, we were down to, I think we ended up utilizing a 35 something for the figure. So,
And where are you now? Or January when you did your last?
35. So.
yeah, I think we used around 3,500. And there's certain days that we do remove from that factor, like atypical days and such. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is probably actually for the committee. On line 11, there's a sentence that says the department may accept and expend matching federal funds without prior approval of the fiscal committee. Is that standard practice, or is that an exception to our general policy?
That's been standard practice in many cases where you have a standalone bill that appropriates general funds that may also come with federal funds. Because in the budget, you're actually appropriating the federal funds themselves, so the department has no reason to go to fiscal. In this case, you're not making that appropriation clear, so you're just allowing the department the authority to spend those funds without having to go to fiscal every time.
All right, and thanks for that. And then the second question, should we specify whether these funds lapse or not, or just leave it?
You could. I think the explanation that Henry gave makes sense to me. I think if you wanted to be crystal clear, you could add a line in here saying that any unspent funds appropriated as a result of this 5 million will lapse at the end of the biennium.
Thank you for the education.
Any other questions from the committee? Thank you very much, both of you. I appreciate it.
We'll hang around if you need anything else.
Thank you. Go ahead.
So Mr. Lippman, I didn't have any more questions about the bill,
Yes.
but I wonder, did you get word, Holly, Heather, Heidi, Happy? I forget your first name. I'm sorry. Brooke. I'm not even close. Miss Belanger, thank you. Did you get word that I would really appreciate a written document of exactly what went wrong and what and if it were oriented towards teaching future Division III people, how we made this mistake so that we don't do it again, that would be great.
I'd be happy to put something together. I had to sort of put that together to explain it to the senators when they were looking at the bill. So I have something already sort of started on that. But the simplest thing to remember about nursing facilities, if you're up against this, is that 5% added to the budget doesn't necessarily translate to a 5% rate increase because of how costs at facilities or their acuities change. And I think it was, in talking to Karen Rounds, I think that was at the sort of the tail end of the committee of conference where, I think it was decided based on input you were getting to make a change. And I think it just happened without the chance to sort of take it back to the department and run some calculations. I think similar to the benefit of a fiscal note, it's, you can test your assumption as to what you're going on. So I guess those are the two things, but I'm happy to write it up and submit it to you if that's all the committee.
And the objective there would also just be tell us how to do it.
Sure.
I mean, we know how to do it wrong. If you could just tell us how to do it right, that would be great.
Also, is it possible to see a spreadsheet that shows the formula that you use based on bed days, acuity, and all those kinds of things? Just to get a feel for how that actually all
Absolutely.
rolls up.
We have definitely documents, but a spreadsheet would be a little bit challenging. But I have documents that we can show that walks through the whole process. It's all written in our state plan, and it's a little bit complicated because it depends on like costs and cost reports. But yeah, we definitely have documents that can walk you through the whole thing. that we already have prepared that we, can to the general public or new nursing facility administrators.
Do they include something like an equation?
For
what I
not
guess-
the date, not the total days and calculating the rates, but yes, and we have committee members and like a committee that we go through first. So absolutely.
What might be helpful if we could do something one-on-one like we did with the actuarial stuff.
That'd be great.
We could
Okay.
show you that, all that details, because some of it's proprietary for
That'd be great. Thank you.
And then also, okay, so it's practically April 15th, and I was unaware of this problem that has been happening since July. And I would just ask you in the future, if we've broken something and you guys need help, that I hate being the last person to hear about it. I have 3 people on my committee on this bill as co-sponsors, and I didn't even know we had a problem. So we have a breakdown in communication, I think.
message heard, and we'll do a better job in communicating to you.
Thank you, Director. Is there anybody else who'd like to give us feedback? Come on up, Mr. Monahan.
Jim Monahan with the DuPont Group for the New Hampshire Association of Counties. I think Henry explained much better than I did or could have, but I did say I would come back and report. I know Representative Leishman isn't here, but I think the question about, is it retroactive and how would that affect salaries was answered by Henry when he effectively said, as we stand today, the 5% rate increase has occurred. The concern is only, will you have funds in the budget for next year to continue it? So I think that answers the question about whether, it is retroactive in nature when it came to any sort of salary increases, things like that. And then finally, just on this question of, the counties were strong advocates of putting the bed count in the budget. As you may recall, part of that was because the governor's budget had an 18% increase in the county cap. And one of the ways to reduce that was to have the committee determine how many bed days is that based on. So going from 4,100 to 3,900 in the budget allowed us to begin to push the county cap down. And that was the reason we did it, or advocated it.
So for future reference, when you're dealing with this, remind us to put in an exception so that we get the number in there correctly, but then we tell them not to use it in an appropriate way.
Well, that's what you've got Kevin Ripple for.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Appreciate it. Anybody else have any questions for Mr. Monahan? Others in the audience? Yeah, come on up. I don't recall your name, so please remind me.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Brendan Williams, President of the New Hampshire Healthcare Association, and just reiterating our support for this legislation. I think for the reasons that Director Lippman outlined, ensuring that the money exists for the next fiscal year to fund this increase, particularly given that the increase itself is still going to fall very short of meeting the costs associated with this pandemic. And so we still regard this as a critical piece of legislation and encourage your support.
Thank you. Mr. Lippman, could I ask you another question? This is a much broader question, but it ties in with the point that was just made about, and that you made as well, that the nursing home costs have gone up and they're being squeezed. Sitting on the fiscal committee, I've noticed a lot of funding coming through for a variety of things, specifically geared towards nursing homes, strike teams, enhanced payments, and that sort of thing. Can you quantify how much funding of that type has come through to assist nursing homes on top of what was budgeted last year?
I'm sure the department could. I think Karen Rounds prepared something for Government Council similar to that question. I mean, I think there's been stuff that's come through the state, through state control of federal funds that have been, and then there's funds that came directly from CMS to facilities. Here's sort of the catch-22 of some of this. For example, you're familiar with probably the MQIP tax that is paid. And so one of the things that, and you're also familiar with ProShare, right? How some of these things can work against each other. But like, so the state received an extra 6.2% during prior period. And we passed that on directly to nursing facilities as payment. The way the ProShare methodology works, they look at payment against cost. So if payments go up as a result of that 6.2%, ProShare gets pushed down a bit. And so there's a lot of hydraulics here in behind how the ultimate rates get set. But so, you know, we increase the facility rate depending on how costs go. It could have, I think we're talking about in this particular rate increase, costs have certainly gone up at least 5%. But if they didn't, you know, then you run the risk that your ProShare for the counties could go down as well to some degree. So it's
So is it hard to quantify?
it's not hard to quantify when you have all the numbers in and can run the calculations. It's pretty, that's what Christy does for us. And I think we've shared spreadsheets with you before for Hillsborough County, but it's hard to anticipate in advance because facilities prepare their cost report after the close of a fiscal year. So, you know, if they're being audited, it may be 3 months past the close of a fiscal year before they truly know how their costs are going to go. And then depending on the share of Medicaid patients treated by the facility, costs may get allocated one way or another. So in a year where Medicaid is more predominant, there's more costs to be able to be paid for under Medicaid. But if another year private pay is a higher percentage, then they could lose Medicaid reimbursement that way.
So looking backward, would we be able to see what that looked like for not this fiscal year, but 21?
I mean, we do all those calculations. Again, I think it's something that we could walk through with you to help it provide some background on it. And
Just be helpful to understand, you know, what the balance is there across the board with all that's been flowing in and out of the state.
one of the things out of concern with where the nursing homes nursing facilities are trying to deal with the labor costs, and through our state county fiscal committee, you know, I am working with Christy, and we're trying to look at different ways that we could, within CMS's allowable methodologies, to find ways to leverage our state spending better. You know, we have a year ago where they try to cut back on it, we found some ways to offset what they were allowing for, but that's a constant battle with us in terms of, you know, it's kind of like tax law. They find different ways to pay less as opposed to you know, a tax situation. But there are people who do this for a living every day. You know that. So we definitely want to make sure our beneficiaries are cared for with enough resources, and so, you know, we're in the game with them.
Okay, thank you. Anything else, folks? Anybody else in the audience like to put in their 2 cents or more? In that case, I guess we're done, unless somebody else has any new business or old business we need to address.
So, do you understand, Mr. Chair, why the chairman scheduled this meeting of Division 3 so quickly after the Finance Committee reviewed the same bill? Is she expecting us to vote this out so that we return it to the committee today?
That's not my understanding. My understanding is she's basically wanted us to get through the work sessions today across the board, all the various divisions. We haven't even voted out the other 2, which are really important. SB, ones I mentioned, the Medicaid dental, and the other one we talked about when you were gone. So we need to vote those out as well. And Representative Wallner asked that we wait until at least Representative Norgren is here and perhaps a replacement for Representative Rogers. Thank you.
Should we show a support for the bill from what we've learned so far? Or
I'm fine with that if everybody else is. I don't want to. You okay with that, Representative Wallner?
can we support it?
So
I can support it.
I can support it.
I can support it, but I'm really irritated. This is the first I've heard about it, really.
And just to continue on then, do we all support the Medicaid dental benefit as amended to match our bill? I do. Yeah. Mr. Representative Wilder?
Yes.
And what was the other bill we discussed last time? I know.
Um,
I can't remember what the number is though.
422 was the, that was the dental bill that was the same as 103. So we all support that, right?
Yeah, 422 was the oh, suicide, was that us? No.
I think the only bills in Division 3 are 412 and 422. There was another one assigned to Division 3 that was reassigned to
Oh,
Division
okay.
1.
Okay. All right, so it sounds like we're all in agreement, at least tentatively, on those two bills. Yes? Okay. Anything else you'd like to do, sir? You're very, very welcome. With that, I'll close the work session. Thank you all for coming.
Yeah, we were surprised at the new
Jeff.
thing.
Delegation. Just got to learn early in life to delegate.
Jeff.
Okay.
I guess sitting in the pilot seat, it's a little harder to delegate.
Either way.
Well, Shorten, I'm going to go lay down. You're in charge.
Wait, Business and Industry Association.
Hey Kevin, you got my email response.
Yes, I did.
So did that give you a little bit better insight of what happened? It was not about the fiscal. I mean, even though people might come back and go, we have to do, we're sure when you print Medicaid, that's gonna be the print date for, but whoever, it wasn't just 430. Oh. 458. Okay. Ike was there